The news shook Mobile, Alabama, like an earthquake on the morning of October 20th, 2024. Word quickly spread that Pastor Robert Matthews, a revered figure in the community, had been murdered in his own home. Known not only as a man of unwavering faith, but also as a mentor, friend, and guide, Pastor Matthews served as an anchor for countless members of the Joy Tabernacle Full Gospel Church. His sermons brought hope, his actions reflected compassion, and his presence provided comfort to those in need. This devastating event struck at the very core of Mobile, leaving the community reeling with shock, heartbreak, and a desperate need for answers. What made the tragedy even more horrifying was the fact that Pastor Matthews' wife, First Lady Tanetta Matthews, had also been attacked during the assault. Though gravely injured, she miraculously survived and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her condition. As her congregation prayed fervently for her recovery, the loss of Pastor Matthews and the uncertainty surrounding Tanetta's survival left the community feeling as though their foundation had been ripped away. Members of the church and friends gathered outside the Matthews residence, mourning together and seeking solace in one another as they tried to comprehend the terrible events. The investigation, led by Detective Daniel Price, commenced immediately. Known for his meticulous approach and relentless determination, Price entered the Matthews home, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The initial evidence suggested a violent and targeted attack. Pastor Matthews had been shot at close range, and the scene bore chilling evidence of a struggle and profound loss. With years of experience handling complex cases, Price sensed that this investigation would be unlike any he had faced, particularly because of the admiration and goodwill the Matthews family had earned in the community. Speculation grew as the investigation unfolded. Then came an unexpected revelation that turned the case on its head. Pastor Matthews' daughter, Charity, had been implicated in the crime. Charity, known to many as the pastor's quiet and reserved daughter, had her own personal struggles. Seen but rarely heard during church gatherings, her involvement in her father's murder seemed unthinkable to most who knew her. Detective Price now faced the daunting task of unraveling not only the mystery behind the beloved pastor's death, but also the intricate emotional layers of a family now torn apart. As he reviewed the early evidence and began questioning those closest to the family, Price realized this was far more than a straightforward crime. It required an understanding of the family's relationships, hidden tensions, and unspoken conflicts to uncover the truth behind the horrors of that October night. The community, gripped by disbelief, struggled to reconcile the possibility of Charity's involvement. Longtime friends of the Matthews family found it nearly impossible to connect Charity with the crime for which she was now the primary suspect. Questions raced through the town. How could such a thing happen? What could lead someone to commit such an unthinkable act against their own family? What secrets might emerge as the investigation pressed forward? As Detective Price prepared to interview Charity and those closest to her, he braced himself for a case that would not only challenge his professional skills, but also test his ability to navigate the anger and grief radiating from all sides. Before the tragedy, Pastor Robert and First Lady Tanetta Matthews were more than spiritual leaders. They were the heartbeat of Mobile's Joy Tabernacle Full Gospel Church. Pastor Matthews, with his calm yet commanding presence, had a steadfast faith and a natural ability to connect with others. For years, he worked tirelessly to bring hope to his congregation and those in the broader community who felt lost or hopeless. Under his leadership, the church grew into more than just a place of worship. It became a sanctuary for the troubled, a safe space where everyone was embraced with open arms. Initiatives like feeding the homeless, offering family counseling, organizing youth outreach programs, and hosting personal growth workshops were all part of his mission to uplift the community. Tanetta Matthews, affectionately called Mama Ned by everyone who knew her, was the perfect partner in her husband's ministry. Warm, energetic, and always welcoming, she took charge of planning church events, overseeing gatherings, and serving as a trusted confidant for anyone seeking comfort or advice. Her kindness extended to all, whether it was a struggling single parent, a young person searching for direction, or an elderly member of the congregation in need of solace. The church members admired her devotion and frequently spoke of her unshakable commitment to her family and her husband's mission. The Matthews home, situated in a serene neighborhood, was more than a residence. It was a communal hub. Church members and neighbors often visited for impromptu prayer meetings or shared meals. Holiday celebrations at the Matthews home were cherished traditions, with Mama Ned preparing lavish feasts and Pastor Matthews leading heartfelt prayers that emphasized gratitude and unity. To those who knew them, the Matthews symbolized family values, faith, and generosity. They were, simply put, pillars of Mobile's community. However, behind the public image of harmony, the Matthews family faced their share of private struggles, many of which centered on their daughter, Charity. Growing up in a household defined by faith and high expectations was both a blessing and a heavy burden for her. Sensitive and introspective, Charity often carried emotional weights that went unnoticed by those around her. As she grew older, she struggled to find her place in the world her parents had built, one that demanded strength, kindness, and unwavering faith. These expectations, compounded by her own internal battles, became increasingly difficult to bear. Friends and family who had known Charity for years noticed signs of her inner turmoil. Though she was raised with a mix of love and discipline, there was a tension between her and her parents that seemed to intensify as time passed. Charity found it particularly hard to meet the high standards set by her family. Church members occasionally witnessed flashes of her frustration, quiet moments when she would withdraw from events or abruptly leave gatherings. The pressures of being the pastor's daughter, combined with her own insecurities, pushed her toward isolation and mental health struggles. As Detective Price continued his investigation, he spoke with church members and family friends who knew Charity well. Their accounts painted a picture of a young woman battling emotional storms, trying to navigate her identity while grappling with expectations she could never fully satisfy. Close friends admitted that although Pastor Robert and Tanetta devoted themselves to helping others, they may not have recognized the toll their expectations had taken on their daughter. Charity's relationship with her parents was marked by frequent clashes over issues like independence, faith, and responsibility. Though her parents tried to guide her, Charity's journey was marked by defiance and rebellion as she sought her own path. The sharp contrast between the Matthews image as a loving, unified family and the reality of their inner struggles left Detective Price pondering the complexity of human relationships. Beneath the polished surface, the family wrestled with the same challenges of love, misunderstanding, and disappointment faced by many others. Yet for the Matthews, these issues were magnified by their prominence in the community. As Price delved deeper, it became clear that unraveling this case would require him to examine not just the crime, but also the private pain and hidden struggles that had shaped the family's story. Detective Price discovered that Charity had struggled for years with severe depression and anxiety, conditions that were especially difficult to manage given her family's prominence. Although she had sought support from her parents, their well-meaning responses often focused on faith and prayer, dismissing the importance of professional treatment. As a result, Charity's mental health needs were frequently unmet, leaving her to face these challenges largely on her own. Adding to her troubles was her relationship with Samson Moore, her ex-boyfriend and the father of her young child. The relationship was widely described as stormy. Charity and Samson had a history of heated arguments and a tumultuous dynamic, which friends attributed to their clashing personalities and unresolved conflicts. Samson, a hard-working but reserved man, craved stability, while Charity's emotional struggles often led to friction. Their disagreements grew over time, and despite their efforts to make it work, the relationship eventually fell apart. However, they remained connected because of their child. On the night of the incident, Charity's actions reflected a descent into despair and unrestrained rage. Witnesses reported that before going to her parents' house, she visited Sampson. Detective Price uncovered testimony from Sampson's cousin, who described how Charity arrived unannounced, her expression tense and filled with inner conflict. According to the witness, Charity exchanged only a few words with Sampson before pulling out a gun and shooting him, leaving him critically injured. This violent act seemed to stem from unresolved bitterness, as her relationship with Sampson had been another source of frustration and abandonment in her life. As Price interviewed those close to Charity, the depth of her anger became evident. Her friends described her as a young woman who, despite her family's wealth and influence, felt neglected and burdened by the weight of their expectations. Several close friends recounted how she had voiced her frustrations about her role within the family, often saying she felt more like a tool in her parents' ministry than a person with her own identity, dreams, and struggles. Charity's relationship with her parents had grown especially strained in recent years. As she faced the difficulties of co-parenting and raising a young child, she needed both emotional and financial support. However, her parents' growing church responsibilities seemed to pull them further away from her. Charity felt sidelined, her needs overshadowed by the demands of their ministry. This sense of neglect festered over time, turning into deep resentment and eventually boiling over into rage. As Price gathered these accounts, he began to suspect that the events of that night were the culmination of years of unresolved pain and frustration. This was no impulsive act, but rather the result of long-buried anger finally erupting. Charity's decision to visit her parents' home after leaving Sampson's reflected a deliberate intention to confront them. Her actions that night revealed a person pushed to her limits, overwhelmed by years of feeling invisible and unheard. Price's investigation into Charity's life revealed a tragic narrative of a woman trapped by her family's expectations and her own emotional battles. He came to understand that her confrontations with both Sampson and her parents might have been a desperate attempt to regain control over a life she felt had always been dictated by others. In her mind, this final violent outburst was a way to force them to acknowledge the pain she had carried in silence for so long. Through his investigation, Price realized that this case went far beyond a simple act of violence. It was a story of emotional neglect, fractured family dynamics, and a young woman who felt driven to drastic measures by a lifetime of unmet needs. He meticulously reconstructed the events of that fateful night, beginning with what occurred at Sampson Moore's residence. Witnesses and forensic evidence painted a disturbing picture of the intensity of Charity's actions. According to Sawyer Moore, Sampson's cousin, who was present during the incident, Charity arrived abruptly, her demeanor distant and icy. She knocked on the door, and when Sampson answered, there was no conversation or argument. Instead, Charity walked back to her car, retrieved a gun from the passenger seat, and returned. In a chillingly calm manner, she raised the weapon and shot Sampson without hesitation. His injuries were severe, and as he lay bleeding, Sawyer immediately called for emergency assistance. Charity, however, fled the scene. The gravity of the act was heightened by the revelation that her two young children were in the car, witnesses to the aftermath of their mother's violent actions. Price determined that this was not a random outburst, but a calculated series of events, indicating that Charity had already decided to confront the people she felt had wronged her. After leaving Sampson's home, she drove straight to her parents' house, her mind set on the next confrontation. When she arrived at the Matthews residence, a home that symbolized love and sanctuary to the community but had become a place of deep resentment for her, she was determined to face her parents. Neighbors later reported hearing loud voices coming from the house. Charity, with her children in tow, approached the front door and demanded to be let inside. Pastor Robert Matthews, known for his calm demeanor and compassionate nature, answered. He tried to soothe his visibly distressed daughter, but he had no idea how intense her anger had become. A witness from across the street recalled hearing Robert's voice, calm yet firm, as he attempted to de-escalate the situation. Charity, however, was beyond reason. Years of pent-up frustration had reached their peak, and her father's attempts to pacify her only seemed to amplify her fury. Inside, First Lady Tanetta Matthews quickly recognized the escalating tension. Despite Robert's efforts to calm Charity, her emotions had spiraled out of control. Witnesses outside the home described frantic movements visible through the windows and the sound of voices growing louder. The atmosphere was thick with foreboding. In a split second, the situation turned deadly. Charity pulled out the same gun she had used earlier that night and aimed it at her parents. Robert, realizing the danger, tried to wrestle the weapon away from her. A struggle ensued, but Charity, consumed by her rage, fired the gun, striking her father. He collapsed, fatally wounded. In her shock, Tanetta attempted to shield herself, but Charity fired again, hitting her mother. Though Tanetta survived, the violence of Charity's actions left Detective Price stunned. What initially appeared to be an isolated tragedy now revealed itself to be the result of deep-seated pain and unresolved family issues. The deliberate sequence of events, from the confrontation with Samson to the attack on her parents, painted a harrowing portrait of a woman in profound emotional distress. The presence of her children throughout the night added another layer of complexity, suggesting that Charity's actions were not only driven by rage, but also by a need to be seen and understood. As Detective Price surveyed the aftermath at the Matthews home, the shattered glass, bloodstains, and scattered belongings told a grim story of unaddressed grievances and deep emotional scars. He realized that Charity's actions were not merely impulsive, but the explosive result of a lifetime of trauma. The details of the crime were horrifying, but what struck him most was the emotional weight behind them. To truly understand what had led Charity to such extreme measures, Price knew he would have to delve deeper into the hidden fractures within the Matthews family, uncovering how a respected household could harbor so much unspoken pain. After the heartbreaking events, mobile police officers located Charity Matthews still inside her vehicle with her young children. She appeared visibly shaken, her face a mixture of weariness and a blank stare, expressions that would later become a point of discussion in court. As officers placed her under arrest, the gravity of her actions seemed to finally dawn on her. News of her capture quickly spread, sending shockwaves through the community. Those who knew Charity as the pastor's daughter, often seen quietly attending church gatherings, were stunned. They struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with someone now accused of committing such a horrific crime. The trial of Charity Matthews drew significant attention in Mobile, with reporters, church members, and residents gathering daily to follow the proceedings. Prosecutors approached the case by arguing that Charity's actions were not impulsive, but rather a carefully planned series of events. They presented evidence suggesting she had intentionally driven to her ex-boyfriend, Samson Moore's house before heading to her parents' home, demonstrating clear intent. Among the evidence introduced were text messages exchanged between Charity and her friends. These messages revealed her growing anger and resentment toward her parents and hinted at the potential for violence. In a surprising turn, several friends and neighbors were called to testify. They painted a picture of Charity as someone who had shown signs of emotional instability long before the tragic night. Friends recounted moments when she openly expressed feelings of neglect, frustration, and even deep-seated anger toward her parents. Some testified that Charity resented her parents' devotion to their church, feeling they prioritized their roles as spiritual leaders over their duties as parents. These accounts added layers of complexity, portraying a young woman who had long battled feelings of abandonment and bitterness. Charity's defense team built their argument around her mental health struggles, claiming that her actions were the culmination of years of untreated emotional pain. They highlighted her history of depression and anxiety, conditions that reportedly worsened after her volatile breakup with Samson. Expert witnesses spoke about Charity's mental state, describing her as someone who felt cornered and overlooked, eventually succumbing to a profound sense of hopelessness. The defense argued that had she received adequate support, the tragedy might have been averted. When Detective Price took the stand, his testimony provided further insight into the Matthews family's dynamics, complicating the case even more. He recounted interviews and evidence that pointed to deep-seated tensions between Charity and her parents, particularly her belief that they prioritized their ministry over her needs. Price's account of the strained family relationships lent weight to the defense's portrayal of Charity as a woman isolated within her own family. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence presented was a series of text messages found on Charity's phone. In these messages, she expressed growing frustration and hinted at a grim resolution to her problems. While the prosecution argued that the texts indicated premeditation, the defense countered that they were cries for help, a desperate plea from someone who felt abandoned and unsupported. The messages became a central point of debate during the trial, with both sides fiercely arguing their significance. As the trial progressed, the community found itself divided. Some viewed Charity as a victim of circumstances, a troubled woman whose unaddressed mental health struggles had led her down a dark path. Others saw her as a calculating individual who allowed her resentment to turn into lethal actions. These discussions extended beyond the courtroom, prompting conversations about the importance of mental health awareness and the hidden struggles that even close-knit families can face. The jury listened carefully as each piece of evidence was presented, weighing the prosecution's claim of premeditated murder against the defense's argument that Charity's actions were the result of untreated mental illness and years of emotional neglect. The testimonies, evidence, and emotional pleas created a complex picture, leaving the jury with a difficult decision. As the trial neared its conclusion, the community waited anxiously for the verdict. When the decision was announced, Charity Matthews was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, leaving Mobile, Alabama, grappling with the tragedy's aftermath. For the congregation at Joy Tabernacle Full Gospel Church, the grief was compounded. They mourned not only the loss of Pastor Robert, a man who had been a source of guidance and comfort, but also the complete disintegration of the family they had once seen as a symbol of strength and unity. In the weeks that followed, church members came together to honor Pastor Robert's memory. They reflected on his inspiring sermons, compassionate outreach, and unwavering dedication to supporting those in need. His impact had been profound, reaching even those outside the church community. Yet the circumstances of his death cast a shadow over these memories, leaving the congregation grappling with questions about how such darkness could have emerged within the family of their beloved pastor. Meanwhile, First Lady Tanetta Matthews faced an uncertain future shaped by unimaginable loss. Though her physical injuries began to heal, the emotional scars ran much deeper. With her husband gone and her daughter imprisoned, her life had been irreparably changed in a single horrific night. Tanetta withdrew from public life, leaning on close friends and family for support as she tried to rebuild. While many encouraged her to return to the church, it was clear that the sanctuary she had once cherished now held too many painful memories of what had been lost. Detective Daniel Price, the lead investigator, reflected on the profound sadness of the case. As a seasoned detective, he had encountered many tragedies, but this one left an enduring impact. Reviewing the final pieces of evidence and case notes, Price couldn't shake a sense of failure. Not as a detective, but as a member of a society that had overlooked the warning signs within the Matthews family. He recognized that the family's deeply rooted issues had gone unaddressed for too long, culminating in a violent eruption that might have been prevented. The tragedy spurred conversations across Mobile about mental health and the hidden pressures within families. Pastors, counselors, and community leaders hosted forums encouraging open discussions about mental health challenges, family conflicts, and the importance of seeking help before it's too late. Joy Tabernacle became a focal point for these efforts, with its members striving to turn their grief into a force for change. Community centers began offering workshops on family dynamics and mental health resources, aiming to provide support for those suffering in silence. For Detective Price, the case underscored the importance of early intervention in preventing such tragedies. In his quieter moments, he often reflected on Pastor Robert's legacy, a life dedicated to helping others. Price found it bitterly ironic that a man who had uplifted so many had been unable to prevent the turmoil within his own family. Despite the overwhelming sadness, Pastor Robert's legacy of compassion and empathy continued to inspire the community. His teachings on forgiveness and kindness were remembered with renewed respect as people sought to honor his memory by addressing the deeper needs of the community. A fund was established in his name to support mental health services for church members and others in need. As Mobile worked through its grief, the community also began to confront its blind spots regarding mental health and family dynamics. Pastor Robert's influence endured, serving as a beacon of hope amid the sorrow. His life and tragic death became both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, urging others to reach out, seek connection, and prioritize the emotional well-being of those around them. Through collective loss, Mobile learned that even the strongest families can harbor pain, and that addressing such struggles openly might prevent future heartbreak.